Okay, welcome everybody to the Language Portals podcast, where we walk through wardrobes, doors, stargates, and ion channels to explore the system of systems that we call language. Enter at the risk of having your long held assumptions questioned, worldviews revised, or consciousness shifted. Here we engage in play and exploration, not to prove any points, but to look for what's possible. And today I have three really wonderful guys with me who all have a deep interest in the Kashmiri sage Abhinavagupta. So we have uh, Ben Williams, Marco Masi, and Howard Sprouse. And we're just going to start by giving a little bit of introduction to Abhinavagupta and his metaphysics of language. And who knows where the conversation will go from there. So, welcome everybody. And I'd like to ask Ben to just kick us off with a little bit about who and where Abhinavagupta was.
Sure. Thanks so much, Lisa. Lovely to be with you. Nice to connect and meet with Howard and Marco as well. Abhinavagupta is somebody that I've been working on for about 20 years, actually. Um, as a Sanskrit scholar, as a scholar of classical Shaiva and Shakta Tantra, he is a medieval philosopher, mystic, uh, aesthete, literary theorist, um, and guru, empowered guru within a lineage. He's a teacher, and he's remarkably self-reflexive about his life, his context. Um, that context is medieval Kashmir. He flourished between 975 and 1025 CE at a time when there was really an extraordinary intellectual and religious culture in full bloom. And so, in many ways, we have to appreciate him within that context because he's the recipient of many, many traditional knowledge systems and religious cultures. And so he's less of a kind of astonishing polymath, just producing things in the void, and more of a great synthesizer and creative exegete who's working with an incredible intellectual and spiritual heritage. It's one way of phrasing that. I'll just say a little bit about some of those background streams. One is these Shaiva traditions, so tantric traditions devoted to Shiva, but more specifically the goddesses that are kind of within a broad Shaiva base. The two most important traditions are called the Trika and the Krama, and he synthesizes them. But he's not the first to do that. He's building off an earlier trend in the scriptural sources. In terms of linguistic mysticism, it's really this interesting text within the Trika, the Parachishika, that is kind of innovative and novel in its articulation of a model of phonetic cosmogenesis, you could say. um, and his commentary on that, the Vivarna, is one place he really articulates his theory of language. Another is in chapter 3 of the Tantra Loka. These are kind of parallel explorations. In terms of that, he's really building upon a very important grammarian and philosopher of language, Bhartrhari, and also on Somananda and even more importantly, Utpaladeva, these earlier Shaiva philosophers who adapt Bhartrhari. But Bhartrhari's theory is actually incorporated into Shaiva Tantras, into the scriptures. So it's really, you could say, a tantric articulation of this foundational uh, linguist and mystic Bhartrhari, who's much, much earlier. Um, so that's one important stream in terms of this conversation. And another is that this figure, Utpaladeva, who's his guru's guru's guru, uh, he really took, I think this is relevant to our broader conversation. He took some of the implicit theologies and philosophies that were in this body of revelation in the Trika and the Krama traditions and articulated it as a pan-Indian philosophy in debating with the Buddhists. And that translation um, takes these esoteric ideas that may have never been more broadly available and brings them into a much larger conversation with people who don't have commitments or initiation in those esoteric traditions. And so that actually can't be underestimated in terms of even our ability to engage these ideas. And it means that one of the mediums of Abhinavagupta's articulation is philosophy. Um, and he's an extraordinary philosopher. I mean, he's a powerhouse when it comes to that. And Alexis Anderson, a great scholar of Shaivism, says it's almost as if he took a PhD in Buddhist philosophy. He's so knowledgeable, and you can feel that he's been sharpened by some of the greatest minds in Buddhist philosophy. And the Buddhists have a very different philosophy of language. And it's a really interesting counterpoint to the non-dual Shaiva philosophy of language. So the main Buddhists here I have in mind, Dharmakirti, Dignaga, Dharmakirti, and Dharmottara. These are the kind of three main adversaries that Abhinavagupta tackles and even historicizes. He kind of does an intellectual history of their ideas, which is absolutely extraordinary. I could say so much more about him, but this is a little introduction to this figure. If there's more, we can go into it later, maybe.
Yeah, so I'd like to just pin a couple of points, and maybe we'll be getting to this later. Phonetic cosmogenesis. Maybe if you could just quickly explain that a little more, because I think that's going to be important for our conversation.
Yeah. There's many different philosophies or understandings, cosmologies of how language becomes reality and the kind of the fundamental linguistic nature of reality within the tantric traditions. And it's the Shakta traditions that see language not just as a feature of material reality or differentiated reality, but kind of going all the way up into the very heart of the supreme principle and permeating and impregnating that heart. And so, how does that divine principle create? One model I think we'll explore is through these four stages of linguistic articulation, from supreme speech to articulate embodied speech. But another is through the phonemes or the letters of the Sanskrit syllabary. It's a syllabary because the consonants include vowels inherent to them in the Sanskrit language. So each one of these syllables or phonemes, there's different enumerations in Sanskrit, but normally they go with 50 from a to ksha. Each one represents a process in the unfurling of creation, or a step in the unfurling of creation. So the syllabary becomes a map for cosmogenesis. Now, this has tantric implications because there's this real deep emphasis on the potency of the syllables. Again, not just as building blocks of a conventional language, but as as vibrant, self-reflective powers of a universal process. And so this divine speech act is articulated through these syllables as it's kind of a map. It's a map of creation and a map of awakening as well, because it goes both ways. And I'll just say one more thing here. In the tantric traditions, the reason why I think it's important, this emphasis on phonemes, is because the tantras, in contrast to the Vedas, introduce a whole new body of mantra. And some of the most important mantras are bija mantras, these seed syllables. So you have, within a kind of tantric civilization and culture, you have an incredible emphasis on the potency of seed syllables. And I think this is part of what we could call like a tantric metaphysics at play that is distinctive even while there are deep continuities with Vedic understandings of speech and reality.
Okay, let's put a pin on that. We're gonna I think I think that's a good transition to Marco, what you have to say. Um, would you like to take us into your thinking about the metaphysics of language?
Yes. Okay. Well, first of all, I must point out that I'm not really neither a philosopher nor a linguist. My original background is that of a scientist, a physicist. So my way of expressing things about this subject will be probably much less precise than Ben is, and Ben has certainly much more expertise in the subject as I have. Nonetheless, I am those kind of scientists that have also this metaphysical bent, so to speak, yeah. And I love to find a relationship between our Western way of thinking and the Eastern way of thinking, which are not exclusive, but in my view, complement each other's profoundly. Yeah? But when you are fixed only on one part and don't see the other part, then we have a problem. Yes, that's what I also felt with linguistics, where I would say most linguists nowadays, if not almost everyone that I know at least, are mostly fixed in a way of tackling with the problem of linguistics only from the Western perspective, which is not essentially wrong, but it is limited if you are limited only to that. And when I discovered these phonetic cosmogenesis, as Ben says, I love this expression, this phonetic cosmogenesis of Abhinavagupta, I was immediately thrilled. I said, that's one of the pieces of the puzzle of how we should deal with some problems and with some questions relating linguistics. And I had also a sort of personal issue with the Western analytic, purely analytic Western linguists and philosophers. And this was so maybe I can try to begin with I can share. I must send a request. I would like to share. I sent a request for sharing my. Okay. So this one. Yes. Do you see something?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is, by the way, I prefer to change the title from the metaphysics of language to the nature and origin of speech, because they usually didn't use the word metaphysics. And in fact, it is more about that. Obviously, it is a metaphysical standpoint, a metaphysical point of view. So about Abhinavagupta, already Ben has said something. Here, of course, Sri Aurobindo, as you can see, we are 9 centuries apart. But nevertheless, I'm not sure whether Sri Aurobindo knew about well, he probably knew about Abhinavagupta, but I'm not sure that he knew about his metaphysical, philosophical standpoint of about language, because he never mentions him. Nonetheless, the interrelations, that there are so many overlaps that I think we should not keep them separate, but they are very well in line with each other, and they complement each other. So, as I was saying, modern language, the modern philosophy of language, yeah, what struck me immediately when I was already a college student, I had many friends who were philosophers and psychologists, especially psychologists, and they were all convinced that language produces consciousness, language produces subjectivity, language produces meaning. Whereas I felt it always the other way around. And here I would invite everyone who is born in this Western context to take a step back, and instead of trying to understand things from the third person perspective, step back and see them from the first person perspective. Or that means from the inside. How do I perceive something? How is my feeling, my intuition, my cognition when I deal with certain specific questions? Do I first perceive the thought, the meaning of something, and then the word emerges in my awareness? Or is it the other way around, that first I perceive and apprehend the word, and then comes the comprehension and the semantic awareness of the word? If you step back, for me, we might have different opinions about that, because, of course, we are talking about something that is very subjective. But for me, first comes something that is pre-linguistic, that comes before the word. I mean here the word with lowercase word, a W, the word, the written word, the sound, the physical sound of a word that you, a table, when I say table, that's a word. For me, first comes semantics, and then the appearance in my screen of consciousness of the word and the syntax and how these words are interrelated and form sentences and so on. Nonetheless, I found so many people who tell me the opposite. When I found Abhinavagupta, who goes the other way around, in fact, but goes much, much further than this simple intuition, I was essentially, I fall in love, at least with his phonetic cosmogenesis. So let me illustrate you very quickly and very superficially. It's impossible it would take hours to go into the details, but you find all the details in my paper. There I went through step by step on each thing. But let me illustrate these 4 levels of speech of Abhinavagupta first. Then we will connect it also with Sri Aurobindo. So at the highest level, what we have is what he called the Paravac. Para means beyond, vac is also means voice, sound, but voice. Also in Latin, voice, voce, or in Italian also is, you have the same root. And for him, everything starts from the highest level, which is the beyond, the Brahman, the ultimate spirit, God, whatever you might call it. And it is a level of pure consciousness. It is a level where of the changeless consciousness, prakasha, and where you have this pure vibratory power of consciousness, where consciousness is changeless and yet has a power. Here you see, from the analytic mind, this is something, a complete oxymoron. It's something that's completely contradictory. Yet you must enter into this first-person perspective and feel it, intuition of something that is changeless and yet has a power of kriya, of doing something, action. One of these powers is the sound principle, the sound, which is a vibrating power of consciousness, so to speak. And it is this initial sound principle that is at the origin of the word. Here we are in a domain where the word is with capital letters. And where there is, however, no distinction between the sound, or the sound word, and its meaning. So between artha and sabda, between meanings and words, there is still not this distinction. And there is also no subject-object distinction. Names, forms, sounds, images, and meaning, again, are one. And it is a plane of consciousness where you have will, knowledge, and action, and power of Kriya Shakti, the power, the energy of change, of doing, of work, are one and the same thing. So these, or if you wish, will and knowledge and action are the 3 aspects, or one, or 3 of the many aspects that this supreme consciousness can have. And one of these aspects, and one of these powers, is self-expression. Self-expression in form then of something, of, let's see, this, and this we find on a lower level. Well, it's not lower, I don't like to use this higher, lower, but if you put it in a diagram, you have at the highest consciousness, so-called, is Brahman, where you have the Paravac. This is the first level of speech. Then you have the subsequent level, Madhyama Vac, which is, Pasyanti Vac, which is the level of the will, where the will emerges. As I said in the previous level, consciousness, will, and action are one. Here, at this level, the first principle of separation begins to emerge. The will to know appears, and it is the first level where forms and images and form sounds emerge. Previously, there are no forms. There are not even sounds in the sound is just a word that we are using here. It's a vibration, if you wish. You should not think of a physical sound, yeah. But there were no images. There were no sounds in the conventional sense. There were one and only one entity that was word and meaning at the same time. Here, instead, a first division appears. And it is the level at where the power of will and the desire to understand emerges. This is also something that we can subjectively intuit, that we can be ignorant without the need to know, or we can be ignorant and there's an urge to know. And a power of will emerges, Icha Shakti, so called in Sanskrit. And where the changeless and the vibration in the changeless consciousness begins to diverge in something that almost audible. It's still not audible, but something of the sort. And this will to know expresses itself through visualizations, images, pictures, if you so, form images would be, or form sounds. And that's also why it's called Pasyanti Vac, because Pasyanti is she who sees. There is a level of consciousness that is associated with something that sees, almost not with the eyes, of course, but we are talking of images. And this is the important level where the semantics appears. Here is the level of semantics. First is the meaning of words, and then the language with words in the conventional sense, not the other way around. Nonetheless, here still there is no distinction between subject and object, between me and this there, between the signifier and the signified. Here is it is a plane where names, forms are one. Nama rupa. Nama, names stands for names, names, and rupa, forms. And the interesting thing that also struck me when I read this was that here every word still is not expressed in the sense of letters and phonemes, but every meaning, every form image, every form sound still has different meanings. It can have several meanings at once. It's not something concrete, and it is not a level of consciousness where you have this rigidity of the mind that dissects everything in one and only one meaning, or not so many at least. And it is where nevertheless there is this desire to manifest something. But here it's still without these distinctions of subject and object. Then the level below is Madhyama Vac, the mediating level, the middle level that between the Pasyanti Vac and Vaikhari Vac that we will see next. And here the Shakti, the power, becomes really active through the power of cognition. Here we are at the level, we begin to enter into our ordinary consciousness of the mind, right, where this separative principle imposes itself, where as I said, there's a distinction between subject and object here. Here it emerges. We have a distinction between infinite and finite, transcendental, immanent, and manifest. And here, the meaning of words appear as conceptualizations, as thoughts. Here we are at the level of the thoughts, and which is something nearer to us. Also, words appear, phonemes, and it is the level where this so-called internal speech emerges. And there's this distinction between the signifier and the signified. And ultimately, it is a level of syntax, where you have structures, categories, and these form images come into existence. You have really not just intuitive images, but real images in your mind. But we are still in our mind here. We have still not expressed words. We have still not opened our mouth, so to speak. And it is at the level of Vaikhari Vac, the level of bodily speech organs, that then here we have the physical, material level, where vibrations materialize and we speak phonemes, words, sentences. And this is a level where reality is then objectified. We have not only subject-object, but everything is made of things, and we perceive things from an objectifying standpoint. Yeah. And this is a level which science, essentially, the last level here, the Vaikhari Vac level, which science studies, which is not, this is perfectly in line also with Abhinavagupta, but science gets something also of Madhyama Vac, but only to a certain point, I would say. But it doesn't touch the level of Pasyanti Vac, and let alone Paravac. And that's why I liked so much this representation of the four levels of speech of Abhinavagupta, because it gives you a cosmological perspective in the sense of consciousness, not in the sense of the cosmos out there, but of the cosmos in us, and connects it with language, with speech. So this was very briefly and very superficially the four levels of speech of Abhinavagupta. As I said, there are much more to say. But in order to make this presentation not too long, I now jump to Sri Aurobindo's perspective. And here we have also something relatively similar, not so different. But Sri Aurobindo was more, was less focused on the phonetic cosmogenesis of language, but on the origin of language in our human language. Yeah? And here also, he had this theory, his claim was that the first sounds that we emit, that the origin of language is not based on words, but on sounds that had a pure emotion and sense value, which means these are emotions, sensations, feelings, and different kinds of infra-rational thought, but that were uttered in sounds, which doesn't need someone having a rational and ability to speak in the sense that we have today, but it was, we could say, so to speak, a primitive form of language. In a sense, we can perhaps compare it to what a baby does. It has emotions and sensations and feelings and expresses it with sounds of that. Yeah, I think you mean. So you understand what I mean. Here, an example is the example of wolf he made. You can find this, and you can find many more examples in Sri Aurobindo's writings. But I just make an example here. Vrika, Vrik. In the original Sanskrit, this means something that tears apart, the tira. And Vrika stood for wolf, and indicated the wolf. And you could express everything with these seed sounds, with these initial sounds that had an emotional content, something with a vrik. That it's more, you must imagine this more emotionally laden than just a simple word. Yeah. As if there's fear, vrik, something that comes and tears things apart. And this indicated a wolf. But it could also have a lot of other meanings. It's not only this one. And Sri Aurobindo also analyzed all the Vedic literature from this standpoint. And for him, words had a multiple psychological significance. Words are not indicating, initially at least, in the origin of language. They were not indicating objects out there. They were first and foremost expressing an emotional state of being. They had a psychological significance. Yet they could somehow represent motion, touch, force, substance, speed, and things like that. For example, Agni is the word for fire, but it could also mean light or wealth. If you think about it, fire and light, if you want to express something that is warm and shines, and also wealth in a sense. I don't know, wealth, but Agni stood also for wealth. And so these initial sounds that expressed in emotion these phonemes could be put together to express many words and many meanings, with many meanings. Even though for Sri Aurobindo, the word was ultimately what he called a soul suggestion, a suggestion that comes from the soul, from the inside out, and had a creative power. And here we connect with Abhinavagupta, I think. And yeah, he said then that the development of speech, it only later, this distinction between the action, the agent, and the object arose, differentiating between subject, objects, noun, and verbs, and so. This was not the origin of language. Previously, there was nothing like that. Yeah? And here again, this transition from no subject-object distinction to a form of expression that distinguished between subject and object is exactly what also Abhinavagupta was saying. For Sri Aurobindo, the root meanings of words stem from sound meanings associated with mind impressions. What are mind impressions? Mind impressions are just the impressions created in the mind by sound qualities. if you hear an explosion, yeah, it probably creates a mind impression that is more emotionally content, that has an emotional content. Whereas if I say 3.14.596, this is an intellectual content. No? It is very different. But there are different qualities in these sounds, which are characterized by what the Indian philosophy calls guna. Guna are tamas, rajas, sattva. Tamas stands for inertia, darkness. Rajas, activity, passion, restlessness, and sattva, equanimity, harmony. Yeah? And these sound qualities that we have in our words determine really their significance. Let's make an example. Words composed of vowels and consonants reflect their original root or seed sounds. Here, for example, he said these vowels express a state of being and existence. For example, A, just being and existing. E, a narrowing intensity. U, a widening, an extended state of existence. R, a vibrant state of existence. I don't know. I would have said, for me, it was I would have replaced U and A, but you see, here we are in a very subjective domain. It's not important that we agree on the single statement here, but there's that background idea, is that all these seed sounds or root sounds express something of the state of our being. Then only later came the composition into complex words, that is semantic units. Let me make only this example that I found quite astonishing. I don't know, maybe it's coincidence, but if you look in Latin, doleo, which means I grieve, dolenter, painfully, dolor, grief or pain, dolus, fraud, dolosus, deceitful, dolos, deceitfully, dolo, I hew, cut or break, indolabra, an axe. All the root sounds are dol, dol, and they have this, they express this state of, this inner state of sensation, of feeling, of emotion, of separation, of cutting, of dividing something. And I would say all these psychological states, grieving, having pain, being deceitful, in fact, intuitively, they represent something that divides, that breaks. And that's how for Sri Aurobindo came into being the origin of language, where for him, at the very beginning, the first humans made no distinction between voice and artha. And here we are again of what Abhinavagupta was saying, that I can't imagine this. I don't know how kind of language this could be, where you speak and where there is no division between the word and the meaning. I don't know what this could be, but this was his claim, and I found this very interesting. Okay, I think I have gone. Let me conclude only with one. As a scientist, I couldn't resist to make some interesting analogy with physics. And the background idea, yeah, is also, as I said, that these vibrations, that the word has also a power that expresses something, a power of creative, it's a creative power. Yeah. Is this in line with our very down-to-earth knowledge that we have in the physical sciences? And I would say so. This is a nice Chladni plate. If you look at it, this is there's a vibration as a loudspeaker under this plate with that has been you put some salt or sugar on it, and these vibrations create patterns. This is famous Chladni plate, or the according to the frequency, you can have always different structures, create different forms. Here, again, something different again. And according to the frequency, yeah, you have a different creation. So a sound that creates something, it's not just a form of communication. It's something that, creates patterns. Here we have perhaps here much more. Can show here this is made with water, and where they shine light from the top to the water. Or it's a basin, two basins, and two water containers. And according to the frequency, you have every time different patterns. You can, and very nice, yeah. It's so-called standing waves, and resonant, and each frequency where you have some pattern is a resonant frequency, and so on. And these things are also things that we have at the atomic scale. Atoms are made exactly by this principle. They rely exactly on this principle. There is a vibration that creates some sort of structure. And you can always find very different forms and structures and so on. Okay, this was something apart. I stop sharing now. And it was just my 2 cents that I added to what Sri Aurobindo and Abhinavagupta were saying. I hope that this gave you some intuitive understanding of what we are talking about here.
Thank you, Marco. Does anybody have anything they want to add or ask at this point?
Yeah, I do. That first of all, thank you all. Thank you, Lisa and Ben and Marco. And I think that something that I have been noticing in myself and following the conversation is how I feel led to the next subject. And particularly, Marco, I think that perhaps you and I share a way of thinking about things, that fundamental way of thinking about things, because literally, as I listen to you speak, I know what you're going to say next, because these are the place that my own thoughts live. And so with that as a backdrop, I think that I get accused of overcomplicating things an awful lot, but I feel like simplicity is really valuable. And I think that particularly as we look at the Kashmiri Shaivism and the 3 states of awareness characterized by the Damasic, Rajasic, and Sattvic states are really, really good here to think about, because
Could you translate that to English for people who?
that in Kashmiri Shaivism, there are things that I think for the Western mind can be best described as perspectives that one can take as a personality. And these perspectives are the way that we look at the world and those things that we tend to identify with. And so, an example of identification is something that, well, you are the son or daughter of a family living within a community, and we do this here and we think this way about life. And so if you step back and you look at it from the Eastern perspective of Kashmiri philosophy, we see it being separated into different, I'll call them levels. We like to think in terms of things are at different levels, but at the most basic and fundamental level, where all these raw emotions live and rule us, this is the Dhamasic level. And it also contains energies that the people who assume these perspectives can manifest in terms of things that are extremely negative. We get carried along in the Dhamasic level of perspective in the way that it affects us to act and think. Now, us Westerners like to be busy, and we like to go to work, and we like to know what is going to happen today, how we're going to do it, and to engage these things. And at this level, within those three ways of looking through the lens of Kashmiri Shaivism, the Rajarsic level, the central one, is where these ideas live, and the perspectives that we assume that guide how we live our lives are ones of busyness, of utility, of how we go to work, what we're going to do, how we think about things, and our identification within society that is busy doing stuff. And for the philosophers and for people who are would be described as devotees of a faith tradition, the way that from an Eastern perspective this is viewed is that the very highest way of assuming a perspective that they call sattvic in this case is through the identification of what might be called guru consciousness. And it may be that you are actually associating in your mind with the thoughts of your spiritual leader, your guru, and that in terms of personal development, that in the East, as a religious person, we think about as enlightenment, that we are able to step out of our personality and into a way of thinking that broadens this association with something that is imbued with the energies of the faith practice that we've assumed. And so as I listen to Ben and listen to Marco talk and in bringing up the sense of being led along, that in the West we're caught up in definitions, and we want to understand things in a way that we can write it down, we can see it. It means this, and we have libraries and books and ways of looking at that. And if you want to get into the subject of Kashmir Shaivism, you can pick and choose of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ways of looking at these philosophies through the mind of Aurobindo and others, Abhinavagupta. There are those of us, however, in the West who have found ourselves at a point where the world of that we live in doesn't square with the feelings and sensations that we're having. And I'm one of those people. And so it's one that, much like listening to Marco speak, he's a physicist, and I am more of an engineer and a person who thinks in terms of identification with whatever it is I've been doing. Like I have an environmental business, and much of that work is scientifically oriented, engineering oriented, and also as a designer. And this is going to be the bridge to where Marco left off with cymatics. Is that for instance, I worked in combustion chemistry and combustion design and the interface between electrostatics and combustion, and lots of combustion engineers. And the difference between a good and a bad one is the art. And it is the bringing in of art and beauty that can also be expressed through the physical forms that we see in Marco's cymatic table. Okay, so here is the bridge between Eastern religious philosophy and the realities of a Western mind, who is looking at the structure of our surroundings and trying to explain it in a way that reflects what we see and what we have seen and what we see as we look at life forms. We look at plants. We look at the structures, chemical structures, the way that they are organized into patterns. Cymatics is something that through the vibrational effect of the surrounding matter, the organizational structure of that is changed. And it is changed in a way that turns into the physical form of these things that we're looking at. And it doesn't matter if we happen to be looking at a vegetable with the beautiful shape that are spiraling, the way that they form and grow, or looking at the structure of molecules and chemicals as they interact with each other, that these vibrational conditions are ones that create the physical form around them. This is completely consistent with the Eastern religious philosophies about form arising from sound. And I tend to think more in terms of the way that Marco has described this as the origin of form as being vibrational in nature, and that at some fundamental nature, this energy, this vibration has allowed everything that we see around us and feel inside of us to begin to manifest. And as an engineer and scientist, I have had to reset my own views of the world to square with the appearances and the sensations and experiences that largely came not through study with me, but rather through experience. So that's sort of how I'm feeling about what we've been listening to and talking about, and the idea that especially in the West, that evolutionary thought is very, very important, and you know, at the same time we've looked at philosophies and religions largely as being fixed, that what their beliefs are what they are. They don't change, and there is a certain I guess security in that, but they're also, it isn't really how things are, because things, they do change and have, and the interpretations that the Kashmiri have made about Kashmir Shaivism is kind of proves that, you know, that, you know, for myself, I think, especially when I hear talking about the seed letters and that it's the experience of these through dream states that with me came unbidden. That I would see these through the dream state, and eventually being able to as someone with an overactive mind who had oh gosh, you know, I built things, and in my mind, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of times, I would build and unbuild them and put every screw in 100 times in my mind, and oftentimes at night. My mind was in control of my thoughts rather than me controlling my thoughts. And it was through experiencing these things in a different way, and eventually studying meditation and working with adepts to be able to control one's thoughts and direct them, and therefore control one's state of consciousness. It's been a multi-decade endeavor for me. It goes on all the time.
Wow, thank you. You guys reminded me of a poem I read a long time ago, and I just found it, so I'm gonna throw this into the mix too. It was in a book by George MacDonald called Fantastes. And I believe he's quoting Cowley here. This wretched inn where we scarce stay to bait, we call our dwelling place. We call one step a race. But angels in their full enlightened state, angels who live and know what 'tis to be, who all the nonsense of our language see, who speak things, and our words their ill-drawn pictures scorn, when we by a foolish figure say, behold an old man dead, they speak properly and cry, behold a man-child born. So let's dig into and I don't want to go, you know, like past the bottom of the hour, because I know you all have lives and things to do. But I was reminded also of what Frank Waters said in an essay called Words, and he was describing the Hopi language. And now I don't speak Hopi, and this could be, you know, like have been disproven, but it's just illustrative. So if you were the Hopi and you saw light flashing in the distance, you wouldn't say something like, I see a light, which separates subject and object. You would just say repi, which means flashing. And so it's like the thing being perceived, the perception, and the being, and the whole experience is still kind of unified. And it's like that language is kind of like operating more on the third level, the Madhyama Vac, more than the Vaikhari Vac. And so it's like how can, as language innovators, which is what this podcast is aimed towards, how can we take this understanding of both the metaphysics and the origin of language and use the power of those that understanding of coming from vibration. And thank you, Marco, for bringing in the cymatics to show us how vibration creates form. I think that's a key part of this. To innovate language in such a way that we can keep it or develop it from those higher principles, and not just like rearranged phonemes in a very arbitrary sort of way. Does that question make sense? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it does. And that as a traveler, that
Howard, can you pause? Ben has kind of a time commitment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I should probably go in 8 minutes. Sorry for the limitation, but I'll just share a response before I leave, and then I welcome you all to continue the conversation. I think that there's a lot of applications in just how we hold what language is. There's a kind of deconventionalization that Aurobindo and Abhinavagupta introduce. That language is something so much more fundamental. It's not just limited to social conventions, to a kind of system of referentiality and meaning, to words that we articulate or even words that we dream in and think in, that it's this kind of primary substrate. And as you go deeper into it, you see that it's not like a coming from humans and behavioralism and biology and genetics, right? It's rather we come from it. All those things come from it. And as you probe into the more subtle regions of it, and there's all of these, phenomenological meditative ways to do it that, Howard, you were speaking about in your practice, or even working with dreams. Even science is trying to find ways to speak to these deeper structures and attune to them, even however imperfectly and however limited the domain. I think there is this non-fixedness to it. For example, the idea of going to the level of the vowels. In the phonetic emanation, the vowels are primary, and then the consonants kind of like explode out of them. And the vowel vocalic level is one of absolute fluidity and potential, where these fundamental powers of universal consciousness are not yet separated and distinct. And so mentioned will, creative impulse, knowing and acting. These are what we see in a contracted form in our individual lives, but these are talking about the infinite power or potential, or Shakti, to act, to know, to will. And so one example, I think in Marco's paper, he mentioned Aurobindo's interest in the power of poetry, at getting back to this kind of non-crystallized understanding of language. Abhinavagupta has a very similar approach, actually. He speaks about the power of suggestion in language and poetry, which can't be reduced to even the meaning or the denotative, so the denotative sense of language, or even the words themselves. It's actually those things are just non-fundamental to this deeper suggestive meaning, this dhwani, which explodes. And so it's a much more kind of consciousness first perspective of how we experience language. The word dhwani literally means resonance, interestingly. So you see this in a dhwani.
20?
Dhwani, Dhvani, dhwani.
Okay.
Dhwani, yeah. It's used actually, dhwani, yeah. So he wrote a commentary on the Dhwanya Loka Lochana. It's based on this theory of Anandavardhana. And it's related to Vyakti and Vyanjana, this manifestation of language, how language manifests itself. So I think this is one way of just loosening our language's hold on us, or our hold on language and how we even understand it. And it opens up this possibility of the freedom, the play of language, all the ways it can, all the things it can do. And I think that freedom within language that is actually embodied in how Abhinavagupta interprets and read texts, especially in the Parachishika Vivarana. He'll take a single word and he'll show 12 different meanings. He'll do all kinds of etymological play. He's constantly showing that there's a superabundance of potential meaning in even the most simple speech act. And so a kind of culture that could work and understand and live with language in this way, I think would do better justice to the linguistic nature of reality. Those are just some initial reflections. I really appreciate, Marco, the clarity with which you lay out the levels of speech in relationship to all of the different factors that you're tracking. So yeah, that's just a little reflection on my end.
Do you think that Abhinavagupta had a parrot? They are very, very good at doing just what you suggest.
Yeah, a parent, did you say?
A parrot. A parrot.
Oh, parrot. Yeah, parrot. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they do that. I lived with an African gray who made up a lot of words.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, there's a great Sanskrit set of stories called the Shuka Saptati, the 70 stories of the parrot. And it's really funny, actually. I highly recommend it. They're really like interesting tales that the parrot tells. It's kind of guidance of the parrot.
Oh,
By the way,
yeah.
it could be interesting also to relate this to this hypothesis that also amongst some animals there is some sort of more or less developed complex or non-complex language. Yeah. I know that there's a lot of research about that, but I don't know how much we can relate this to what we have just seen today.
Actually,
but it would be, I think ultimately it would, if Abhinavagupta was right, we should see, and Sri Aurobindo was right, with this idea of the seed sounds. I think we should see this reflected also in the animal kingdom, because everything originates from this universal consciousness ultimately. No?
he talks about it actually, and so does Bhartrhari.
Oh.
They speak about the sounds that animals make, and information and intelligence and potential. It's not the same as like human speech and language, right? But so they make these differentiations, but even how animals know things, their instincts. This is the other thing. Aurobindo used the word instinct, and you mentioned this. The Sanskrit for instinct is related to this notion of pratibha, and that's a concept for Bhartrhari. It's how birds know where to make their nests. It's how fish know where to swim. It's how birds know where to, right? They're following this instinct. And that's deeply tied to the intelligence powers of languages for Bhartrhari and Abhinavagupta. And again, it's because they're not limiting it just to systems of sounds and language and reference, right? And this is where I think it goes into biosemiotics, as you mentioned. It's even the signs that organisms make, which are forms of communication, right? So the peacock fleshing its feathers, or the dances that, the mating dances, right? And so look at the expressiveness of any animal and all the communication that's happening. If you start to just see these levels of communication as a kind of form of language.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how they understand it. That's what they're making room for. And I think what Aurobindo is doing, going back to the roots and these basic sounds, is aligns with that, Marco, right? Like these basic sounds we make relate to these deeply instinctual, psychological feeling responses to situations that are pragmatic, And so absolutely, this is what this theory does, is it really starts to not make language anthropocentric.
Yeah, interesting. We're not anthropocentric. I think this is the right way to put it. Yeah. In fact, I also propose to some scientists to make some sort of research on this, but I also tried to publish this paper. I sent it to several journals, but they didn't even send it to the referees. They rejected it from the outset because all the linguistics journals that we have today are strictly analytical and scientific, rational. They don't accept this metaphysical kind of mystic insights. And and that's also what Howard was saying. The problem is that we should develop this multi-perspectivity, begin to be able to think at the same time in different modes. The Western mode, the Eastern mode, the scientific mode, the mystical mode. It's perhaps impossible to do it 100%, but at least we should try.
There is a bridge, though, Marco, in that you brought it up early on when you began speaking about the alignment with philosophers, and it is in these disciplines, and in philosophy and in psychiatry, we consider these academic disciplines as being scientific, and yet you may do your postdoc work on something that doesn't fit at all within the realm of engineering type scientific
I did
processes.
Yeah, it was in photonics, so it was a bit. Yeah, it was in the direction of engineering, but this also I didn't want to do that, but in hindsight, precisely because it was something so far apart from my initial thoughts, I developed also an contact and an attitude where I could get into a language that is proper for the experimentalist, not just the theoretical physicist, and which is something that a lot of scientists lack. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Ben.
Okay. Bye, Ben.
Thanks,
Thank
Ben.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
so much.
Have a nice time. Yeah.
So I want to throw in a concept that I hadn't thought of before this conversation in this context of language, but it came to mind today. The implicate order, with seed sounds having a multiplicity before they get pulled down into speech. It reminded me of how there's the implicate order that Bohm talks about that has multiplicities of possibilities before they become explicate.
Yeah, you have this in quantum mechanics, that you have a potentiality, that particles of quantum system can be in a state of potentiality. They could become different. The outcome, when you observe them, you could have different outcomes, but the object initially is in a superposition of all these outcomes. It is not one or the others. It is all at once, in a certain sense. Yeah, I put it it's a bit more complicated, but I don't go into the details. But it is interesting that you find these things again reflected in the microcosm. Yeah. And that have been said by people that could know nothing about these things, because Abhinavagupta was more than 1,000 years ago. So it cannot be a coincidence for me. It reflects something that is inherent in nature. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would just for any language innovators that are watching this, I guess I would just invite you to consider exploring your own connection with the creative will, the creative power that I don't even quite know how to say this. The one way of thinking about it is like with the Kabbalistic tree of life, the power comes down from the Ein Sof, which is that first Paravac type of consciousness that is, all encompassing and non-distinguished, going down through the tree of life to existence, to Malkuth. But then we also have to go back the distinctions of everyday language to go back into the sort of non-distinct worlds of where subjects and objects are not distinguished, where meanings and words are not distinguished, and just play around there a little bit and see what happens.
Lisa, do you believe that there can be a starkness, is the word that I'm feeling like using here, in approaching that subject? And as an example of a sentence, almost every sentence that one can read, for instance, in a newspaper or magazine, we can start chopping the modifiers away, and we end up with something there in the middle, or central to the idea, that isn't influenced by the modifiers. And I find in my own life that I start to view things differently without the effect that these have. And so some examples are the identification a person has with what their pronoun is, with their sexuality, with their trade identities, or a subject, that we have these subtle influences of the modifiers that guide the outside viewer. Again, going to Marco, talking about viewing things from the first person rather than the third. What do you think about that? Is there an advantage to a starkness in a language structure?
Well, I think both have their places. There is a place for starkness, and there is a place for the details, and the details meaning the modifiers. And it's in the mobile balancing of both of them that the real play and power happens. If you don't have that core, then the modifiers are just fluff. It's like icing without a cake. Or it's I won't just go into metaphors, but as you all know, I'm a both and kind of person. Do you have any thoughts on that, Marco? It's okay if you
Not
don't.
on this specifically. I was thinking about what you were saying in the previous question about how could we climb up from the Vaikhari Vac to the ultimate stage, to the Paravac. We are here, and what could we do? It's nice that we are telling ourselves these things, but at the end, I don't ask me examples now because I have no example in mind, but maybe you write books, right, Lisa? So just come up with 10 words that reflects this other way of using language, of speaking and of writing, and use them consistently throughout all your book. So perhaps something may go viral. Who knows?
Yeah.
That could be a way to change our language.
I think that's a great idea.
That came in mind before Ben left. When the question before, I don't know, don't remember exactly how it came, just in that moment, without words.
Yes. Right. Okay. Any last thoughts, or do we feel complete?
I never feel complete. No. That's the distress for my life. Every time that I think that I have done something that completes me, then I find other 10 things that are missing for my completeness. I hope far from it. But yes, it's fascinating. It is not the goal, but the way where we the going,
Yeah.
the doing, the going, the path is a real thing, not the ultimate goal in itself. It may be sounded as an excuse more than else, but yeah.
And I wanted to start this podcast series like with the big picture, and this is like as big a picture as you can
Yeah.
and to just, I mean, it's kind of paradoxical to ground people who want to innovate language in this very expansive worldview that Abhinavagupta and Sri Aurobindo share, and give us clues as to how to come about innovation from a very expanded place, as opposed to thinking of it in terms of like as a way to solve a problem.
Mhm.
Like there's more, there's like, let's go to like the will to create, the power of vibration to create, and create from these very expansive places, as opposed to just flipping phonemes around. Yeah. So thank you all for
Thank you, Lisa.
part of this. And if you have other ideas for future podcasts along these lines, let me know. I'd be up for it.
I'll give you one. I'll leave you with one thing: is that in modern languages, there is a modern language that has evolved without words, and here's one. This is "Help me, please."
Mhm.
Can you read that?
Help me, please, aiutami, per favor.
This is
Yeah.
Italian without words. Help me, please.
Yeah.
And this is who he's talking with.
This is yeah.
So it could be done.
That is still as a Pasyanti Vac. This is form images.
Right. Yes.
Even higher we must go.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you very much to everyone. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you.